The Epic of Gilgamesh. This is a PowerPoint lecture that you want to go through after reading the Epic of Gilgamesh. Before getting started on the themes in the epic that you see on the page in front of you, I want to go over what an epic is. An epic comes from the Greek word epos, which means the uttered word, and a combination of epos and mythos, and mythos means tale. An epic is a long narrative poem on a grand scale about the deeds of warriors and heroes. Also, epics are often of national significance in the sense that they embody the history and aspiration of a nation in a lofty or grandiose manner. Finally, there's two kinds of epics. There's the primary epic, which is an oral primitive epic. Gilgamesh is an example of a primary epic. And then the secondary epics are written and literary. The Aeneid is an example of a secondary epic. The Epic of Gilgamesh is the earliest epic, as early as 2150 to 2000 BC. This is earlier than the two great Indian epics of Mahabharata and Ramayana. Also, it predates the two great Greek epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. So it's pretty old. As you see, the themes in the particular Epic of Gilgamesh include self-discovery, beating the odds, friendship, and adventure. As I stated earlier, there are two kinds of epics, the primary epic and the secondary epic. In a primary epic, this is the first kind of epic, and this was originally a part of oral tradition, as you see on your page in front of you. Oral tradition is when storytelling passes important cultural information down from generation to generation without the need for writing. So these were the first kinds of epics. They were told rather than written down. The Epic of Gilgamesh is part of the common cultural heritage of the Mesopotamian tribes. These tribes were called the Sumerian, Babylonian, Assyrian, and Akkadian tribes. Gilgamesh was the Sumerian king around 2700 BC. The Epic of Gilgamesh, though it was first told as a primary epic in oral tradition, it was first written down at about 2000 BC in the Babylonian language. It was also found other additions by other languages, such as the Elamite, the Hittites, the Hurrians, and the Sumerians. This system of writing is known as cuneiform. The earliest English translation of the epic is by George Smith, and he published his translation in around 1872 or 1874. The translation of this epic and other archaeological discoveries in Mesopotamia readjusted the Westerners' view about Christianity and Hebraic culture. We may find the Hebraic myth of creation, such as the flood and the Noah family, was influenced by the Epic of Gilgamesh. If you remember reading in Gilgamesh, there was a flood, just like in Genesis, there is a flood. The Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, was finished at about 400 BC. The Epic of Gilgamesh takes place in the city of Uruk. This is an ancient Mesopotamian city, and this is now modern day Iraq. Takes place, city of Uruk would have been around in 2800 to 2500 BC. It is part of the Sumerian civilization. There were, while this wasn't a large city, it's a good sized town of 50,000 people. This is also the civilization who possibly invented beer. So, this might explain why college students like this story so much. I'm kidding. Okay. Gilgamesh certainly had some flaws. Partly because he's part God, part man. He's a bad king at the beginning, and he becomes good at the end. What makes him bad? Well, he sleeps with maidens on their wedding nights. Okay, so not the best guy in the world. He separates sons from fathers, seems to take pride in it. He engages in fights. He's boastful and arrogant, and he also abuses his subjects. But then he moves toward, thanks to his friendship with Enkidu, he starts moving toward good and seeking more good. So he forms a friendship with Enkidu, and that's an underlying theme in this. And the friendship is an underlying theme in this story. Instead of just fighting for the sake of fighting, he starts to fight for the good of his own people. Um, he reflects on his knowledge of the past. Instead of being so arrogant and oh, I can do it all, I'm great. He starts thinking about mistakes he's made, what the past was like in order to move forward. So he grows up, and he even returns to his home in the end. A lot of themes of Gilgamesh you can see in the literary doubles of Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Gilgamesh was called a god and a man. Enkidu was an animal and a man. It's the story of their becoming human together. So where Gilgamesh actually starts out, as man and he's part divine, he's kind of animalistic in the time when he was a bad king. Enkidu starts out as mostly animal, but as he sleeps with Shamhat, as he builds a friendship with Gilgamesh, he becomes more and more human. So both men or both, excuse me, both characters are together becoming more man. We know Gilgamesh was two-thirds a god, one-third a man. So you have to ask yourself what conflict might derive from such a combination. Perhaps maybe the two-thirds god, more god than man, it has something to do with why he's so arrogant. It also has this question, what are the differences among gods, humans, and animals? And what are the significance of Gilgamesh's tyranny and his fighting against gods and goddesses? The gods, as in any epic tale, play a very important role. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the role of the gods is to create humanity and bestow death on them. Um, Eternal life is reserved for the gods, not for humans. Remember, this is not a Christian story, so you got to kind of think of it that way. The gods who were ticked off by the slaying of Humbaba without their consent take Enkidu's life to teach both him and Gilgamesh a lesson. The gods in a lot of epic traditions often would be the equivalent of really bad bosses. Um, they don't so much have a human's best interest at heart, but instead they live as a way to control the human race, and if the human race steps out of line, they punish them. So these aren't forgiving gods. These are gods who constantly boast and who constantly um, want the humans to know they are in charge. Perhaps one of the most interesting connections one can make in the Epic of Gilgamesh is the commonalities the epic shares with the book of Genesis from the Bible. Um, what these commonalities show is that in history, these things, there were some things that you have to, assume happened because they are marked in multiple records. For one thing, the numbering in Gilgamesh is similar to that of Genesis. For instance, the number 40. Gilgamesh and Enkidu fight for 40 days and 40 nights after first encouraging each other, much like it rains, for 40 days and 40 nights in the Bible. So 40 is a significant number. 7, just like the Bible, 7 is also a significant number. Gilgamesh refuses to accept Enkidu's death for 7 days until a worm falls out of his nose. Appetizing, right? Just as it took 7 days for God to create the earth. The flood. Interesting. The flood is there are accounts of the flood in many different pieces of literature out there. Utanapishtim is like Noah. He builds an ark and endures a great flood. So that's kind of an interesting connection as well. With everything you read, you should always ask yourself why the story is still relevant. What's important about it? What can I get from it? With the Epic of Gilgamesh, it teaches us that it is human nature to ponder life and death, and that one cannot get by without friendship. We need each other. Life is a journey toward wisdom, not toward death nor eternal life. This is shown through Gilgamesh developing a friendship with Enkidu. He's not out to seek eternal life. Um, what it's showing is that life is important and that humanity is important. The value of life and of the quest lies in living together and sharing with others. And also, you see in the Epic of Gilgamesh how Gilgamesh's humanity was not whole until he suffered for his best friend Enkidu.